I've experienced quite a bit throughout my life when it comes to the paranormal, and it all started at my old childhood house. It was a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom home in Garden Grove, California. If you were to drive by and look at this house, it's cute and it's a little home in a good environment. However, the things I've experienced sparked my interest and curiosity about the afterlife. Everything in every room in the house felt awkward whenever I walked into it. I shared the middle bedroom with my younger brother, who was only 4 at the time. Once a month, I would have a nightmare of a girl sitting on our picket fence with red eyes aglow, staring at me with such a playful expression. She didn't seem happy that our family was there. Nonetheless, us kids. The strange part about that was, whenever I would have these awful dreams, I would wake up to find my little brother crying, as if someone had really hurt him. I never really took the nightmare seriously though. We had an old, rusty swing set that we loved so much. I was only 10 at the time. During the daytime, everything would be fine, and no strange feelings would occur. However, once nighttime falls, our backyard would be off limits. My mom wouldn't let us go to the back and play on summer nights, and she, well, never told us why. One night, my mom forgot to turn off the water hose, so she kindly asked me if I would do it for her. The idea of it was already bothering me, but I didn't take anything paranormal into consideration. So, I went down, straight to the back of the house, and the walk there felt like eternity itself. I had a strong, eerie feeling that I was being watched and even followed. I bent down to turn off the hose and had a fear so strong that it made me tear up. I ran into the house and swore never to do the favor for my mother again. What made this incident particularly eerie was the fact that I swear I heard a sobbing. It was like in my mind, but I swear it was outside. In another awkward time, my mom was taking a shower, and I was in my room watching TV with my little brother. I heard her call my name, so I came to see what she wanted. She asked if I could go to the towel cabinet and grab her one. When I did, I walked up to the door in pure darkness, and I swear I saw a ghostly hand, but it was still a woman's hand with red fingernails. I immediately thought it was my mom's hand at first. The strange thing was, it was translucent. Like I said, a ghostly hand. But I mean, you could see right through this person's hand. So, naive as I was, I thought I said Mom, and instinctively handed her the towel. The towel dropped to the ground, and the hand disappeared. My mom then opened the door and looked at me, saying, "Barbara, what are you doing, honey?" That's when I told her, "I was giving you the towel you wanted." My mom looked at me with such confusion and said, "You know I was in the kitchen, right?" When I look back at that incident, I know it terrifies me now, but at that moment, I was simply not afraid. I just chalked it up to something non-paranormal, and maybe my eyes were just playing tricks on me. But at that moment, it was pretty obvious that I was both hearing and seeing things come to life. Paranormal things at that. There was much more that went on in that house, such as, if you were sitting in the living room watching TV, at the corner of your eye, you will see a dark figure walking up to the front door. Immediately, you would assume someone was here, so you trot over to the door to find that no one is there. It happens almost every week to everyone in my family. I love that house, but I didn't love being followed or the feeling of being watched while taking a bath. After spending most of my childhood in that house, we moved to another city nearby. Now this house is quite dramatic. I'm 19 years old now, and I lived in Georgia for 3 years to finish up school. Coming back, Strange activities started happening, especially in my new room. My grandfather passed away 3 years ago, and my room used to be his room. At night, getting home from my boyfriend's house, I would hear the floor creaking. I just assumed there was someone walking around, but to find that no one was out there at all. I remember one night, laying on my bed with the lights out and just the TV glaring. I fell asleep and woke up to see a pair of transparent, veiny legs pointing in my direction. I knew immediately who they belonged to. Grandpa. Grandpa was watching over me, and that didn't, and still doesn't scare me. But there's another presence in the house. A girl, I assume. I came one night from staying at my boyfriend's the previous night. I left the door opened because I was planning on changing and going to say hi to my parents. While changing, I have a habit of looking at the door to see if anyone will walk by and see me change. So, I looked a few times, and when I looked the last time, at the right side of my door, I swear I saw the apparition of a girl, her bright blue eyes, glowing and bulging right at me through the crack of the door. The eyes then disappeared. I trotted to the door, looked to my right, and nobody was there. Just then, it was my teenage cousin, Diane. But I looked towards the left side of the hallway, and there she was. I was absolutely freaked out in that moment. Well, those were some documented instances of my family's paranormal history. I hope for future sake that I never have to experience any of this again. Even though the first few incidences weren't that scary, and even my grandpa incident, yeah, I wasn't scared. However, if it were any kind of other ghost, like the one I was just talking about, I might be a little bit more frightened. I'd like to refer to this haunting as the haunting in Duxbury, Vermont. We bought the house from the niece of Leo Morse in the fall of 1999. Leo lived here his entire life. Shortly after we moved in, we heard strange footsteps on the second floor when we knew no one was up there. During one such incident, my husband, myself, my 2 children, and a couple friends heard someone walking across the floor in the upstairs bedroom as we all stood in the living room below. One night, when I was taking a bath and was lying back in the tub with my eyes closed, I suddenly felt very uneasy, like someone was staring at me. I looked behind me to where the door was and saw this transparent mist, and it disappeared within a second. The door creaked open just an inch, and I screamed my head off. My son, while still in high school, had similar experiences of being watched by someone who couldn't be seen. Our television has also turned on by itself on more than one occasion. Our channels have changed, with the remote sitting out of everyone's reach. In the fall of 2007, my husband had just walked upstairs to go to our bedroom when I heard him hollering at someone and asking him what he wanted. We all ran upstairs to where my husband stood, in the doorway to our bedroom. He was staring at the back wall of the other bedroom, pointing to no one and yelling, tears in his eyes, for someone who no one else could see to get out. This lasted for several minutes until the man, whom my husband said was in his early 30s, brown hair, clean shaven with round, wire frame glasses, dressed in a flannel shirt and blue jeans with the bottoms of the legs rolled into cuffs, disappeared. It was a very restless night that night, and my husband, who is not drunk or on drugs and isn't prone to hallucinations, doesn't like to talk about it much, but is very adamant that it truly happened. We haven't had any more sightings since then, but I still hear footsteps and unexplainable bangs and thumps coming from upstairs every morning after I get up, and I know my husband is still sound asleep in our room. My name is Andrea. I'm from New Mexico, and I'm 17. I've had numerous experiences throughout my life with the paranormal. I'll start from the beginning, I suppose. Before moving to Deming back in 2000, I lived in Hatch, which is about an hour away. We used to live in what was called the White Brick House, near the park, and not even a half mile from the schools. Hatch is very small. Anyway, living in the house was my mom, my very abusive dad, who I call Alex. I don't even call him dad. My 2-year-old sisters, and my older brother, and me, the youngest. I don't remember the experiences in any specific order, but I remember them as if they happened yesterday. They are all very true. Believe if you want. We had a certain room called the back bedroom that no one really liked to go to, at least not alone. This room had an extremely strong presence in it, and it was only when you entered it you could feel its presence. You could stand in the doorway and look in the bedroom and feel nothing, but as soon as you stepped, that all changed. You feel like you're being watched by one great evil spirit, or a great number of evil spirits. You would have to leave. It was so uncomfortable. We couldn't even get any of the dogs that we had throughout the time we lived there to enter that room. While there was that room, there was also other things that happened in the rest of the house. One night, my mom swears up and down this happened, and so does Alex. They were getting along. A rare occasion. I love these nights. My mom put all 4 of us to bed, so her and Alex had some alone time, and were relaxing together in the spa, talking one night. In the middle of their conversation, both my mom and Alex saw the shadow of someone walk past the doorway of the spa room. My mom thought it was one of us that had gotten up in the night and went to check in on us, only to find us all snoring in bed. Her and Alex then asked us the next morning if we had gotten up, and none of us had. Another time, me and my oldest sister were playing in what we called the second kitchen that had a room off called the craft room. My mom paints ornaments in there. We suddenly smelled a strong perfume that didn't smell like any perfume made today. Then we heard a conversation between maybe 4 or 5 people. We looked in and saw 5 older upper-class people in clothes from the early 1900s time. I remember one man specifically. He was bald, with a brown beard, and a looking glass eyepiece like the rich people would wear back in the day. He was wearing a black penguin-tailed suit with a white button-up underneath. He looked somewhat pale, but not very transparent. He turned his head slowly and looked straight at me, not my sister, and nodded his head. Shortly after, he continued to speak with his company. I ran to my room and stayed there for the rest of the day. We had an organ in the living room, along with a drum set and Alex's guitars. We're all musicians. Amps would turn on, even when they were unplugged. The organ played as though a very experienced pianist were playing it. Piano was one thing none of us really learned how to play, so it was obvious none of us was playing it. There were times when the dogs would follow something we couldn't see down the hallway to my room and Alex's room. My older brothers one night got up to get a drink of water in the second kitchen, and that's where the laundry room also was. He's 22 years old now, and still swears this is true. He saw a tall figure standing by the washer and dryer near the back bedroom, and he felt it as an evil being. It just stood there, glaring at him, but never moved, as if it was frozen, but with the evil expression looking at him wherever he moved. He figured it was Alex. He shouted out Alex's name, but didn't hear a response, so he figured he was mad and went back to bed. The next morning he asked Alex why he was so mad at him. Alex just looked at him and said he was at the bar. My other sister said she was walking by the back bedroom one night and swear she saw a black figure out of the corner of her eye, standing straight up against the wall, and it tried to grab her with its arms, but couldn't reach, as if it was restrained. After Alex left, we moved out of the house and into a little apartment. There's only been one thing that has ever happened to me there. I got up in the middle of the night to get something to drink, and as I was going back to my room, I saw what looked like a little blue orb, glowing in intense blue. It moved around for a few minutes, before ultimately dissipating into thin air. Aside from these apartments we lived in, we also moved into a trailer not too far from the white brick house. This house was always said to be haunted because the man who used to live there died of a heart attack in either the yard or the bathtub, and he had 2 dogs that died of mysterious causes after he did. It was almost as if they died of a broken heart. There would be nights when we could hear the clicking sounds of a dog's nail on the tiles. I was in my room reading one night when my whole dresser just fell over. No reason for it just to fall over. My friend and I, Rosario, and my sister were all in the living room one night when we heard a window shatter come from my room. We never found a single shard of broken glass in the house or even outside, even though the sound came from inside. Finally, I would always see the shadow of someone walk into the laundry room, and no one would be there when I looked. All of these incidents were fairly alarming to all of us, and I'm convinced that they were being followed by the same evil spirit that resided in the red brick house. These days, I never experienced any hauntings, and I'm very glad that this is all over. In the fall of 2001, my parents bought an old Victorian house in a quiet suburb. It was a huge relief for us because that year was a very tumultuous time for our family. We couldn't find a house that was affordable, and nearly every house we found in the area was either in need of major repairs or super expensive. When we moved into this home, there had been mumblings around town that nobody wanted it due to its supposed hauntings. By the way, I'm 21. The house had a history of violence and death. The city is very safe now, but years ago, it was considered one of the worst cities to live in. It was said that a man who had lived his entire life as a loner took up residence in the house in the early 1920s. One night, he apparently hired a prostitute to stay the night with him. She was unaware that he had no money to pay her for her services. He led her into the kitchen, playing off that he had some spare cash lying around the house. He ultimately ended up strangling her to death and chopping up her body. He was apprehended months later and ended up dying in prison. When the cops questioned him, all he could say was that he needed love. In the first months, we had stereotypical noises that any house would make and dismissed it as nothing more than just noises. However, doors would open and close, lights would flicker on and off, and there was this funky odor that always seemed to linger throughout the house. It was very hard to describe, but it smelled a lot like rotten eggs on a very subtle level. The most terrifying thing that occurred was when I was in the kitchen in the middle of the night. It was about 11 p.m., and I had just come home from work and entered the front hallway of the house at first. That's when I heard whispers, which sounded like the word lonely. I figured I was just exhausted from a long day's labor, so I decided I needed to get to bed. But before I did, I fixed myself something to eat in the kitchen. I walked into the kitchen, but that's when I heard moaning sounds, almost like someone was struggling. As I sat on the chair by the kitchen table, I saw the transparent figure of a woman with an anguished look on her face. She appeared for a few moments, then disappeared. She looked like she was from another era and wore all black. Her face looked disfigured and beaten. It terrified the living hell out of me, so I ran upstairs to get my parents. I guess I just needed some comforting, and I found out they weren't home yet. There were other incidents that occurred in that house. My mom actually told me that she was in the laundry room when she could distinctly hear the sounds of a growling man in the laundry room late at night. This was something that seemed to happen quite frequently around the same time, and always only in the laundry room, nowhere else. It was never something really loud and startling. It was always faint, but insanely scary. There were times that we would see two shadows in the corner of our eyes, constantly walk back and forth from the kitchen to the living room. Again, this was subtle. When anybody would actually turn to directly look, these shadows would be gone. Most of the time, we always thought it was just our eyes playing tricks on us, and even after my incident, I still thought that. Anyway, that's my story. It might not be too exciting compared to others, but it is creepy and insane. I'm glad I don't live in that house anymore. Sadly, my parents still do, but it seemed that nothing happens anymore, besides the subtle doors creaking open slowly from time to time, and the continuation of lights flickering. Thanks for reading. I feel kinda silly writing this, since I haven't talked much about it since it happened. I'm 17 now, and still can't come up with any explanation other than spirits. I've always been a believer, and hope to one day have my own encounter with ghosts. I never thought it would be as terrifying as it was. 8 years ago, summer of 2000, my dad's family was having a reunion, and we all decided we would stay at Oak Island Beach in North Carolina. I'm not sure if that is the exact name. I know it was something to do with oak in it. The week we were there, the weather was very fickle. It rained most days, and the sun was only out 3 or 4 times. Most of our time was spent indoors. My parents, sister, and grandparents shared one condo. My dad's brother and sister and her family shared another, and his step-siblings were in the third with their children. One night, while it was storming, my cousin Josh and I went to the condo to play video games and watch TV. Everyone else was in our condo, playing cards and drinking. We played Dino Crisis and an X-Men game, and decided to watch cartoons after about an hour. We spent another couple of hours just goofing off, when the storm really started picking up. We were sitting on the couch, talking and laughing, when we heard a creak on the balcony outside. Neither of us is scared easily now, and we weren't then either. I looked out of the sliding doors, but everything was pitch black. We went back to our conversation and had no interruptions for a couple of minutes. When a bolt of lighting lit up the beach, we saw a man standing on the balcony, dressed in a trench coat. He seemed to be looking out at the sea. It all happened so suddenly. We didn't believe what we saw, no matter how skeptical we were. We weren't about to go and check like I had with the noise. After a couple of minutes, we noticed the door was fogging up. Not the entire thing, just a little patch about 6 feet off of the floor. We were very spooked now. During the next bolt of lightning, we both saw the man standing against the door, looking in on us. He screamed, and I screamed, and we jumped over the couch, headed for the door. We yanked it open, and as we did, we heard the sound of glass breaking. We didn't look back, just ran across the parking lot to the other condo. When we came in, we were soaked and out of breath. Our parents started to freak, asking us what was wrong. When I told them, they just laughed and brushed it off. We kept begging them to call someone, but they refused. After about a minute, they got fed up with it. They grabbed us and their umbrellas and dragged us over there. When we went in, the place was just as we left it. The door was intact, and no one was on the balcony, not even a footprint. I know I didn't imagine it. I believe that the spirit was drawn to me for some reason. My cousin has had no other experiences that he has told me about, and I've had quite a few, but none as intense as the first. Anyone that has had a similar experience, know that you're not alone. Finding the site has opened my eyes to the world of ghosts and those that have been affected by them. Thanks. My Aunt Terry, from my father's side, lived in Oklahoma. When I was about 16, she came here to Memphis, and she told me about a house that she lived in. She said that when her husbands and kids moved in, there was a barn out back, and she said when she walked in there was an upside down pentacle on the barn floor. After she saw that, she never went back out there. One night, when everyone went to bed, my Aunt Terry heard the dogs barking in the kitchen. She went into the kitchen and watched her dog bark at a corner in the room. The next night she went to bed, and the TV in the living room came on by itself, and she said it did it every night. So one night, she decided to unplug the TV, and she went to bed as normal, and the TV still came on. Then another day, after everyone ate dinner, they were all sitting in the living room. My aunt looked out the window and saw a pair of red eyes. Her husband saw them too, and it really freaked them out. On yet another night, my aunt and uncle and the kids were leaving to go see a movie, and on the porch stood a beast with red eyes, and half his body was human, but the rest of him was like an animal. She described his hands and feet as hoofs. Well, after they got home that night, my aunt and uncle made the kids sleep with them, and Catherine started to get really sick. When my aunt and uncle tried to take her to the hospital, the car wouldn't start, so they had to push the car all the way down the street, and it started right up. The doctors couldn't find out what was wrong with Catherine. My aunt and uncle decided to move, and every morning the car wouldn't start when my aunt had to go to work, until my uncle pushed it down the street. After my aunt and uncle found a new place to live, when they got everything they owned out of the house, Catherine got better immediately, and the car never gave them a problem, and the TV never came on by itself again. Some strange occurrences, but I swear they're true. Thanks for reading. The Hampton Inn on Warner Road, off Route 279, has a haunted room, which is number 417. My husband stayed in this room while on a business trip in March 2008. He frequently stays at this hotel while in Maryland, but never had an experience like this until he stayed in room 417. This was his room for 3 nights, and for the first 2 nights, he was very restless and didn't sleep well, which was not a normal occurrence for him. On the 3rd restless night, he realized that he was hearing noises inside the room, not from adjoining rooms. These noises were hangers moving around in the closet, the refrigerator door opening, noises from the bathroom, and the sound of glass being set on the nightstand next to the bed. Final thing that really spooked him was that something grabbed his side as he laid on the bed, trying to ignore the sounds and fall asleep. He was not imagining any of this. He could still feel the sensation of his side after jumping out of bed. He looked around the room and checked the deadbolt lock on the door, and all was secure. He considered packing and checking out, but it was 3 a.m. He finally fell asleep and checked out the next morning. He has since stayed at the hotel and was offered the same room upon check-in, but he refused it. The hotel clerk wanted to know why, but he didn't want to sound foolish and wouldn't elaborate on his experience. For the record, he didn't believe in ghosts or spirits until this happened. We believe that someone must have died in this room, heart attack or something, and their spirit is trapped there. We dare anyone to stay in this room. It is creepy. Last year, I was living in an apartment on the far northwest side of town in Chicago, Illinois, and had one experience in an apartment that for the most part was pretty quiet, but for this experience. I lived in a frighteningly active apartment on the northeast side before this occurrence, so this didn't really totally freak me out, but I was sitting in my living room on the couch reading. The sun was reflecting through the blinds, which I halfway closed, and the TV, which was directly in front of me and perhaps 8 to 10 feet away, was off. I sat reading for quite some time, and at one point looked up and into my reflection on the TV screen. Sitting a few inches from me was a woman with a pageboy hairdo, perhaps in her early 40s, with glasses on. I could see her curves as she sat, so there was no mistake that she was a woman. I turned instantly to my left side, irrationally expecting to see someone sitting next to me in my lockdown apartment where I knew no one but myself had been the entire day. No one was there, of course. I looked back into the TV reflection again, and she was no longer there. May I point out that there was absolutely nothing in that apartment that could have made such a reflection. I was on the second story, so there was nothing inside that could have reflected that way, no nearby trees, etc. It was a bona fide experience. There was this one terrifying experience, though, that has haunted me ever since while being in that apartment. I was sitting in the bathroom, doing my business, as usual. I left the door open because I felt very uncomfortable with the door closed. I don't know why, it just gave me that feeling. I saw that same lady, early 40s style, with the pageboy hairdo, right outside the door. It was like she was fixated on me, and she appeared momentarily, just staring at me. Although the bathroom light was obviously on, the hallway outside the door was pretty dim, so you could just barely make out the outline of her face and her body. There were some slight changes with her this time. The only difference being this time was that she looked like she was in some kind of nun outfit. It was really creepy. This was the moment where I was terrified. I didn't know what to think. She kind of looked like Mother Teresa in a way. It also looked like she was trying to open her mouth, but somehow couldn't. Like she was unable to speak or something. Maybe she was in danger. Just like that, she disappeared. And later on in that day, I also saw an orb float around. It was pretty eerie. For the record, this was a highly Polish neighborhood, and had been for years, so I have a feeling it was some old Polish lady that couldn't leave her building. I lived there for a year, and am now gone. I also have a theory that because she is Polish, that she was wearing the nun attire due to her religion. You see, Polish people are Roman Catholics usually, so it all made sense to me at the time when I thought about it. Thanks for reading. I had a personal experience at this bed and breakfast, and it was so exciting. A friend of mine and I were staying in this B&B, the Henderson House, while we visited her daughter at a nearby Baptist university where she is a cheerleader. We stayed in the downstairs guest bedroom by the dining room. When we arrived, they were setting up for a big sit-down dinner and reception with round tables covered in white tablecloths. It was a big affair that went on for a while we were at a football game. When we arrived back at the B&B later that night, it was late, and the staff was cleaning up and putting up the tables. They apologized for making so much noise, and said that they'd be finishing up for the next hour or so, washing the tablecloths and putting them away. We were exhausted, so we each took a shower, and my friend crawled into this beautiful mahogany bed, and I pulled out the sleeper sofa and settled in and watched TV for a little while. Finally, it quieted down somewhat out in the parlor, so we turned off the lights and immediately fell asleep. I woke up some time earlier as 3 women in gowns brushed by my bed, carrying things. We had gotten quite friendly with the innkeeper and her staff earlier, so I really didn't think that much about it and wondered why they had put things away in our room before morning. The next morning, I asked my friend what the women were doing in our room the night before. She said, "What women? No one came in here." And she motioned towards the door where the deadbolt was still locked. She went out to the dining room for breakfast a little before I did, and as I was walking out into the hall, she walked up to me and said, "Come here, the owner has something to tell you." When I walked into the kitchen, the owner looked up and said, "So, you saw them, huh?" I told her I saw 3 women in gowns, and she said, "They are dressed in wedding and bridesmaid dresses." She then walked into the parlor and opened the big old photo album and turned to the page that showed a wedding party lined up on the staircase. It was them. They are seen from time to time, getting ready for a ceremony, and the bedroom where we stayed at was once a porch that leads around to the front of the house. Because it is a Baptist college, they don't promote these ghost stories, as the college frowns on it. But she said many people see them. There is also a ghost of a captain, Army or Sea, I didn't quite get, but he haunts an upstairs room with a big bay window and is seen often too. It was not a frightening thing. I loved it, in fact, and hoped to go back again. They were not see-through people, and had I reached out, I could have touched their dresses. Maybe. In the year 2000, my husband and I moved to LaGrange, Georgia, to a fairly new apartment on Old Airport Road. His job had transferred him from New Hampshire, and he was able to be on a 5-day shift, 5 on and 5 off. That meant he would not be home every other week, as he was a truck driver for a major store chain. Anyway, after being there a month or so, we decided that it was a great little town to settle down in, and began looking for a house. During this time, we had no incidents at the apartment. After another 2 months of searching, we finally found the house we wanted. It was a 3-bedroom ranch with a small in-ground pool located in a rural part of LaGrange. When our offer was accepted, we were ecstatic. This is when my 4-year-old son began falling out of bed at night, something he had neither done before or after living at this apartment. Eventually, this led him to waking up in the middle of the night, and I would have to go in and confront him, which was usually fairly easy to do, and he'd go back to sleep, only to wake up later again in the night. When I put them to bed, I would sit in the hallway between both of their doors. Daughter's bedroom was at the end of the hall, which was about 10 feet long, but their doors were close together. I would have all the lights off, except the hallway, and once they were asleep, I'd go and get on the PC in the dining room, adjacent to their hallway. This hallway had a bathroom at the opposite end of the bedrooms, and a laundry closet, where my washing machine were. One night, my son insisted I lay with him in bed, so I laid down behind him, closest to his closet, with him closest to the door. My eyes were closed, and we were both resting quietly, when suddenly he half sat up in bed, and said, "Who is that?" Naturally, I asked, "What do you mean?" He said a woman in a long skirt just walked by his bedroom door and headed to his sister's room. Of course, this is the week my husband's gone, so I'm alone in the apartment, thinking someone must have broken into our second-floor apartment. So I got up and looked. My daughter, who is 9 years old, thankfully was sound asleep, so I checked her room, closet, and under her bed to make sure no one was in there. I questioned my son again, and he said no one passed back by his door, and there's no exit from my daughter's room, just right by my son's room. I brought both kids to sleep in my bed on the other side of the apartment that night. Another night, I sat in the hall again until they were both asleep. Now keep in mind, all the lights are off except the hall, which includes their big walk-in closets. No lights on. When they were both sleeping, I got up and used their bathroom at the end of their hall. While in there, I heard what sounded like a toy hitting the wall of my son's closet, which shared a wall with the bathroom. Thinking that he woke up and started playing, which was not like him at all, by the way, I went to his room to find him sleeping cozily, but the closet door halfway open and the light inside open. Okay, so now I'm freaked out because I know that the door was closed and the light was off, and yes, his bed's right next to that closet, so yeah, I took them into my room again. Again, on another night, my son wakes up again, but this time my husband's home and we're all asleep in our own beds. I can hear my son crying, so I go to comfort him, but he's not there. My husband and I can't find him, but he's still crying, sobbing, a terrified cry actually. In a minute or two, we find him hiding under the sink in the bathroom at the end of his hallway. He told us the mean lady won't let him pass. He had tried to come in her room, but she stood in front of him. Again, he described her exactly the same. Long skirt, hair up behind her head, and she makes faces at him. Now I know for a fact I'm dealing with a ghostie here. My husband thinks I'm just going nuts and putting stories in the kid's head. My daughter, meanwhile, never notices any of this and is not disturbed. While on the computer one night, late around 2 a.m., I hear 3 distinct loud knocks under my feet. One on the left in the small kitchen, one directly below my feet, and one to my right. Sounded like someone downstairs used a broom to knock on the ceiling in extremely rapid succession. I sincerely doubt that anyone can move as quickly in the downstairs apartment and get by the furniture they undoubtedly had there, just as I had mine arranged. I know for a fact the lady and her kids were in bed by 10 at night. So the bank has decided that they will give us a loan on any house in Lagrange, except that one, because it's rural, so we try another place and another. One night, I'm sleeping, and have a more vivid than any other dream I've ever had, kind of like a dream nightmare. In it we live in the house, and I'm looking for my son, only to find him floating face down in the pool. I woke up crying, and made up my mind that there's no way I'm ever moving into the house. So now I must convince hubby, who thinks I'm nuts anyway, and is determined to get to that house. Well, having bought a puppy when we started looking for a house, this collie is now almost fully grown size, but he still has accidents, so we keep him penned in the kitchen with a large baby gate. When we go out, this doggy somehow gets past the gate by pushing a corner or whatever, and is running around our apartment. So one night, we're going out to dinner, and hubby and I lock up Poochie and set 2 high back dining chairs against the gate. Keep in mind, our apartment is carpet, thick and plush everywhere, except the kitchen. When we return, Puppy is looking at me from my kid's hallway, and the gate is still exactly as we left it, and the chairs are too. Not one thing had moved, but somehow, according to Lovey Hubby, I'm supposed to believe the dog vaulted over the chair backs and somehow landed without killing himself or breaking my dining room table, which was a mere foot or two from the chairs. Yeah, okay. My downstairs neighbor's kids told me that their mom was upset because I let my kids run around my apartment, banging at all hours of the night, mostly after 10 p.m., and she can't believe I let my kids stay up so late. She has to get up early, yada yada yada. Except, my kids are in bed every night at 9 o'clock, and asleep no later than 9:30ish. I see a shape leaning out of the kitchen door, watching me as I watch TV and tell it, "Come sit by me and leave my son alone." It didn't sit with me, but it didn't bother my son that night. I never noticed my dog noticing anything. The only cold spot in the house was the kids' hallway, and not always, just mostly. Hubby slept in son's room one day, in the afternoon, and, even though we had central air, complained that he sweat like a hog, and had the worst nightmares ever. But the place still isn't haunted, and yes, he steadfastly refused to ever sleep in there again. I saw blinds move on their own, doorknobs that rattled when I was alone in the place, and no, it wasn't a teeny shake caused by some truck rumbling by, which was there some 50 to 100 feet between the side of our apartment and the road. This was a defined and voracious shaking, a definitive hello, I'm trying to open the door, but no one in the apartment but me. Finally, my husband grew tired of trying to get a loan for that house, and mysteriously, everything stopped. No more rattling of this or that, no shadows, but by now, it is also true that the four of us were sleeping in my waterbed, in the one room that never seemed affected by the haunting. But I noticed everything in the apartment changed and felt cozy again. But by then, I'd also decided that tornadoes, large cockroachy looking bugs, and the ghost belt were too much for me, and we packed up and came back north. Interestingly enough, when we returned home to my parents' house, which we later bought, which has never ever felt anything but perfect there were 3 knocks on the bottom half of my bedroom door one afternoon. I was alone in the house. Immediately, I felt that was the spirit or something, telling us we made the right choice by not getting the house. My father believed that it was his mother who had lived and died in North Carolina, who knew something bad would happen to my son if we bought that house, especially since it all seemed to stop when we stopped trying to get financing for it and gave up on the house. My son has never been affected by any other ghosty type stuff since then, and he's never fell out of bed again either. Feel free to email me if you choose. Earlier this year, I attended a camp in Reuben County, Georgia. There, I was told the story of Timothy Dalton. The story is that, in the late 1970s, the Daltons lived in a rural area of Harbison County, Georgia. Supposedly, Timothy was about 11 years old, an only child, and his parents didn't really like him. They abused him in every way possible, and kept him in the basement, due to them not thinking it was worthy of a room upstairs. This wasn't even really a basement, more just like a cellar, with one small window that was about 2 feet in length and a half foot up. Mr. Dalton's wood workshop was down there, so at night, Timothy would work on whatever he could. His father didn't mind him working with his wood, because his father would take whatever Timothy made and sell it without giving Timothy any of the money. Well, one day, Timothy was at home, alone weeding the field, when the postman came. His parents had got off into the next city over to get some supplies for the upcoming fall. Now, Timothy knew that there was such a thing as mail, but since his parents didn't tell him where it came from and neglected to send him to school, he never knew what it honestly looked like. The postman approached Timothy and asked him if his father was around. When Timothy answered no, the postman handed over a package. He had never seen a package before, and was informed not to open it or even shake it. It was his father's and not his. Timothy went inside the house and set the package down on the kitchen table. He couldn't stop thinking about it, so he opened it and made sure that he could seal it again. Around this time, power tools started to come out, and Timothy's father figured that he should have one since he does work on wood sometimes. Timothy saw that it was a power drill and was in awe. He couldn't wait until that night to start making something. So, for the rest of the day, he just went around and collected logs and sticks so that he could make something. Once he found them, he set them by the window and at night would open it and pull them in. That night, once his parents locked him in the basement, he started to work. He worked and worked for about 3 hours until he came up with this beautiful rocking chair. He had never seen something this beautiful and never been this happy about something like this. So every night, throughout the summer and the fall, he would sit and rock in it until he would fall asleep. Well, a horrible blizzard blew through, and it was a horrible sight. All the crops of the city had died, and nothing was left of them. So one day, Mr. Dalton told Timothy to go and find firewood for the fireplace, since they didn't have electric heating. Timothy knew that all the firewood would be wet, but decided not to fight with his father. After about 2 hours, Timothy had found some dry pieces to possibly hold them over for the night, so he turned back and started to walk back towards the house. As he approached the end of the woods, he noticed that there was a smoke coming out of the fireplace. He found this very odd and didn't quite know why his father would send him out to find firewood if he already had some. So Timothy walked into the house, and as soon as he walked in, he was horrified. He saw his rocking chair, the only thing he had ever been proud of, chopped up in the fireplace, burning to little bits. Timothy snapped. That's all to say. He didn't start to yell at his dad or anything. He just mentally snapped. So he sat down the firewood and did his chores. Before he was locked down in the basement, he managed to sneak some chicken wire under his shirt, so he took it down to the basement and was locked in there. After about an hour, he knew that his mom and dad had just turned off the light to go to bed. After maybe 3 hours, he had constructed this power drill into this killing machine. He had found an X-Acto knife and bound it to the power drill so that when he turned the trigger on it, it would spin around and around. So he used some chicken wire to unlock himself and walked up the stairs to his parents' room. He slowly bound his parents' hands and feet to the bedpost and footboard. It took him about an hour just to do this without either of them stirring. So, once that was done, he just stood over his father, staring him dead in the eye with his hand and power drill behind his back. As soon as his father awoke, he started yelling at Timothy, calling him a freak, and wondering what he was doing there. So, Timothy didn't do anything, just pulled out the power drill and jammed it straight into his father's heart and turned it on. His mother was screaming bloody murder, so he pulled it out of his father and slowly walked around the other side to his mom. She was crying and was in absolute hysterics. Timmy looked over at her, then revved the power drill once and shoved it straight into her neck. He just dropped everything, didn't wash his hands, didn't even try to clean up. He didn't care if he was caught. All he cared about was that rocking chair. So he went over to the fireplace and sat down in front of it and stared into it for 3 days until the police got suspicious and noticed that they hadn't seen them for a while. When they came to the house, they didn't even have to ask any questions. They knew what happened. So they admitted Timothy into the psych ward, where he stayed until the late 90s. Now that you know the story, I can get to my experience. It's important to understand that story so you can understand the experience that happened to me. When I was with my camp, our cabin of 20 boys and girls were on a bus headed to Helen to go tubing on the Hooch. It was really rainy, so they didn't want us going in the water, so they took us to go bowling in the Habersham County. The night before, we had hiked up Blood Mountain and was told that story, so we were all pretty freaked out. Well, me and my friend Kelly and her boyfriend Jake decided to go walk around the bowling building, since a lot of the counselors were already back there. So as we're walking back there was an old man with slightly grayish hair standing out there and smoking. We had been informed that if you see anyone outside your camp, that you kindly say hello, don't say your name, and only tell where you're from, camp-wise. The man did what any other person would do and ask us our names. We sat down on the curb that was parallel to him, but the length of a car away from him. We told him that we were from CHH Lake Burton, and that we were here with a camp. Well, that still doesn't answer my question, he said. Kelly spoke up. I'm sorry, sir, but we're not allowed to tell you our names. He looked at her and laughed a little. Well, Kelly, my name is Tim. We're all completely shocked and confused. How do you know our names? I asked. He laughed again and put out his cigarette. Let's just say that I know a lot of things. Habersham is a very quiet town, and as of last night, for you guys, it was a very innocent town too. We were all in shock and awe. How did he know that he knew about the murders? We all got spooked, and Jack led the way back around the building. But every crazy person has some parting words. Just remember this, he said to us as we all halted to stop. I wouldn't have had to kill him if he just kept his eyes closed. To this day, it still haunts me. The wheezing laugh of that man, and the wondering of the story. Is it honestly true? A few weeks ago, my grandparents and I went to a Mormon pioneer cemetery a few miles from where I live to get a picture of an ancestor's gravestone. While driving into the cemetery, I noticed a particularly tall gravestone. As soon as I saw it, I got the chills. Normally, I'm not scared of cemeteries or things like that, at least, not in the daytime. As we left the cemetery, my grandmother pointed out the creepy headstone. She said it was her grandaunt's grave, and that this lady had crossed the plains to come to Utah when she was about 8. She later went north to help settle in the town of Richmond, Utah. Then Grandma told me the following story. When my Aunt Andrea was about 15, she was home alone in the kitchen right after school. She heard a woman's voice and turned around. She saw an elderly lady in a long, old-fashioned style dress with her hair in a bun. Andrea ran out of the house and to a neighbor's, where she called my grandmother at work. Grandma thought she was trying to get attention, but told her she could stay with the neighbors until she got home from work. The same thing happened twice over the next 2 weeks. My grandma requested a picture of my great aunt from my great grandmother so she could copy it and hang it up on the mantle. It was lying on the counter the next day when Andrea came home. As soon as she saw the picture, she jumped. She asked Grandma who it was, then told her it was the ghost. Andrea never saw the woman again, but says it wasn't scary, more like a lady that wanted to help. I know this one's kinda short, but thanks for reading. I have a story to tell you of a sight which will always be engraved into my mind for life. A friend of mine and I were avid hunters, and we were returning from a duck hunting trip in a place called Dunmurry. We were trying to remain as quiet as possible so that we could catch and hunt as many of those ducks as possible. As time wore on, we weren't able to find too many, but still decided to have a look by the river to check for those elusive ducks. Before we crossed the fields back to the house, we made our way across the M1 motorway at Dunmurry and had our guns loaded as well. It was then when my heart thunderously stopped and noticed something far more terrifying than a simple duck. I put my last shell up the spout and noticed a tall, light tan colored figure to the right of me. It seemed to be about 7 feet tall and off of the ground by about 2 feet, and scared the crap out of me. I couldn't speak, and I warned my friend to stay away. At the time, my friend was right behind me when I saw the figure, but didn't quite understand what I was so terrified about, since he didn't see it himself. I told him to start running, and running as fast as possible, so we could be as far from this mysterious figure. My first instinct was to point my gun at it, but I urged my friend to stay away from this thing. I thought by pointing at it with my gun, I would scare the figure away. Of course now, looking back, it was a ghost, so it sounds silly now. We eventually made it out of there without incident, and explained to my friend what I saw. He called me crazy, he called me insane, but I swore to him that is exactly what I saw. A 7-foot figure floating directly at me from the distance. This happened about 14 years ago, and neither of us went hunting at night again. I told a friend of mine this story, and he explained that a figure not unlike a monk had been reported on the motorway from as far back as 30 years ago. Huh, wish someone could have told me, then I wouldn't be as spooked. My grandparents used to own a home in New Hartford, Connecticut, until about 5 years ago. It was a huge house, mostly built by my gramps, and it sat centered on about 4.5 acres of land. It was really nice, in the daytime, anyhow. It was a 2-story house with a huge attic and a basement as well. There were a total of 5 bedrooms in the main part of the house, and there was a 2-bedroom apartment connected to the house. Now, just as a bit of a background, my gram and gramps were some really cool old people. They traveled a lot. In fact, they've been to many different countries. They have been to all 48 continental states, plus Alaska, in their RV. A few years before I was born, they went to Haiti, and they bought this freaky little wooden statue. Ever since I was a little girl, anytime we went up to Connecticut to visit them, I hated that statue. A giant pillowcase used to have to be put over it so that I couldn't see it. One night, when I was about 13, I was sleeping in the bedroom that was converted into my gram's needlepoint and sewing room. I woke up to go to the potty. A little freaky statue man had the customary pillowcase pulled over him and was standing in his usual corner across the short, squared hall from my room. I went potty and came out. First thing I always did was I had to check and make sure that the little man hadn't moved. I ended up wetting myself when I looked and saw the pillowcase on the floor in the corner where scary statue man was, and then looked at the corner by my door, and he was there. I was only in the bathroom for 2 minutes, and that statue was way too heavy for anyone to move it, and me to not hear it. Everyone else was asleep anyhow. My older brother, the one who would have been sick enough to pull a mean prank like that, was not at my grandparents' home. He was in Bark Homestead with my cousin Sean and my Aunt Joni and Uncle Jim's house. As soon as I saw that Mr. Man was waiting for me by my door, probably waiting for me to walk by so that he could grab me and eat me or something, I immediately took off running down the stairs, which was an incredible feat for me in and of itself. if you've never seen a fat 13-year-old girl run before, and run through the family and living room, through the kitchen, into the foyer, and up 2 steps to the attached apartment where my mother was sleeping with my little sister Hannah and my baby brother Ryan. The next morning, bright and early, we went upstairs to investigate, and where was the statue? Back in the corner it was supposed to be in, with the pillowcase pulled over it. I've had many encounters with the paranormal since I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I've seen ghosts, and I've even heard and seen the presence of demons. I wanted to share 2 of these experiences with you. People can think what they will, but I take these things very seriously, and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are real and walk among us. First ghost to ever cross my path was that of a woman. I was 5 at the time and had gone to the kitchen to get a drink while my family was watching a movie on the hydro bed. I was standing there, drinking my water, when I see in my peripheral vision a woman in a white dress floating down the hall from my aunt's room right into the room occupied by my mother and myself. Being as I was a child, a thought only that this lady didn't belong in our house surfaced in my mind. Well, for some reason, I decided to throw a kitchen knife at it, and you guessed it, the knife went through it. I always believed that she was hiding in my closet as well. There would be numerous instances where I'd be sleeping in my room in the middle of the night. That's when I would hear the closet door and see it open a crack. It was very terrifying, and I didn't know what to do but to stare in absolute terror. There were more than a few instances where it felt like something was trapped inside there and was trying to claw its way out. So much so, in fact, that actually the door was splintered in a few places. My second encounter was with a phantom miner. Sounds weird, huh? But let me just say that this was in Sacramento, California, where gold was discovered. Sutter's Mill was about 10 to 15 miles from our house. I saw the specter in our backyard, digging in the ground. He was dressed as a miner, would have dressed in the 1840s. He even had a mule with him, loaded down with things. It was at about 10 p.m. at night. I guess he found what he was looking for, because he pulled something out of the ground, put it in a pack, grabbed the mule's reins, and started to walk away. About 3 seconds later, he had vanished from sight. The thing that was odd to me was that a water pipe that was in the spot where the phantasmal miner was searching at, that very next morning, mysteriously began to leak. Strange series of events, but I'm glad you were able to read them, and I appreciate your readership. Since I was a little girl, my sisters and I had frightening experiences with ghosts. When I was 6, my family and I moved to a fairly new house, only 8 years old at the time, in West Texas. As far back as I can remember, we had strange things going on in that house. First off, at night, if you were to go through the hallway to get to my parents' room, you would always hear what sounded like a TV. You could hear voices and sometimes music. Most of the time, my parents' TV was off. If you left the room and stood in the hallway again, the sounds would be gone. Secondly, when I would try to go to sleep at night, I would always have that classic someone's watching me feeling. I always blamed it on me, being a young child. The house was a very scary place to be at night. Wherever you went, someone was watching you. Friends who have spent the night rarely stayed twice. The areas of the house that scared everyone the worst were the hallways to my parents' room and my older sister's closet. The closet always had a feeling of hate radiating from it. I tried to spend a night in there with my scared sister, and didn't last. I was sleeping on the floor with my head next to the closet, and that just wasn't a good feeling. I went back to my room after she fell asleep. A couple years after we moved in, my younger sister had a frightening experience. Her and I shared a bedroom with our beds parallel to each other, with a nightstand in between us. We were about 3 feet apart. One night, I woke up to her screaming my name. I woke up and asked what was wrong. She told me that, for no reason at all, she woke up and looked over at my bed. Laying at the foot of my bed, she saw a light blue, glowing figure of a woman. Her eyes were gone, and her mouth hung open. My sister described her as looking dead. My sister also added that she couldn't see me anywhere on the bed, so she started screaming my name and closed her eyes. When she opened them, I was awake, asking her what was wrong. She told me, and I looked down at the foot of my bed, and my huge stuffed animal that I had there every night was sparking like it had really bad static electricity. I took it off my bed and threw it in my bathroom sink and ran water over it. Being young, I thought it would help. Years later, my family and I moved to southern Louisiana and moved into a gated subdivision. One night my two sisters were mad at me and left the house to go on a walk. I followed them without them knowing. I followed them up to the front gate of the subdivision and talked to them for a minute. They quickly left in a huff, being that they were still angry with me. For what? I don't remember now. I stayed by the gate for a couple of minutes afterwards, and then decided to run to the end of the main street and hide behind some bushes that faced the gate. I waited for my sisters to walk by, and when they did, unaware of where I was hiding, they stopped remotely in front of the bushes. I heard my younger sister say, "What is Jenny, me, doing, sitting on top of that stop sign?" The stop sign is located next to the gate. After that, they walked on. I was a bit confused. It was about to chase after them, but then, through the leaves, I saw a shadow of someone running past the bushes I was behind. I could also hear the sound of footsteps. I stood up quickly to see who was there. No one was in sight. After this, I ran to my sisters and told them what I had seen. They then told me that they saw me, or what looked like me, sitting on top of the stop sign. They said I had a very angry, disfiguring grin. After we traded stories, we ran home quickly. Later, my younger sister told me that the ghost she saw on my bed and the ghost she saw on the stop sign both looked exactly like me. Possible doppelganger? I don't know. It all began around the 1st of June, this very year. This incident took place in my grandmother and grandfather's house. My grandfather had been diagnosed with cancer in the summer of 1998, and I didn't know that these last few months would be the last time I would ever see him alive. During that period of time, I'd spent a whole lot of time with my grandparents, and had felt like I actually gotten a little closer to them both, but especially my grandfather. At the end of the summer I left, and went back home. Subsequently, about 5 months later, our family received a disturbing phone call. It was from my grandmother. Unfortunately, she informed us about the passing of our grandfather. He had passed away in the hospital. We went back to our grandmother's home, which was the very last place that our grandfather lived in before his passing. A month and a half after we had been staying there, I noticed that something just didn't feel right. The whole atmosphere had changed. I decided to take the guest room. For some reason, I always got the feeling that I was being watched in the guest room. Then, other little occurrences started to evolve. The very first was, I always felt like somebody was standing over my shoulder. I started to notice scars on my back after I would awake in the mornings, and I would feel light touches on my back. My mom and brother both complained about the door handles being rattled and opening and closing really fast. Cabinet doors would fly open, and the pots and pans would all fall out. My hair would get pulled in the night. Objects would fall from midair, such as paper, and I would hear voices, one of which said, "Wake up," very loudly in my ear. I would see mists and rays of light shoot past me extremely fast, and so fast in fact, I could feel a whoosh of air. I would notice some of my belongings missing, such as my CDs, jewelry, and money to name a few. Usually the belongings that I would use around the house a lot. I would feel my bed move, as if someone were to bump into it during the night, flickering lights, and last, but certainly not least, since animals can sometimes see things that humans cannot see, my cat would turn her head really fast and just stare at something, which I would not be able to see for a significant amount of time. A little while later, about a month after being there, I saw the unthinkable. After I had sound sleep for about 7 hours or so, I woke up suddenly to a spirit at the foot of my bed, and it was my grandfather. I could not believe what I was seeing, but I will describe this to you in full detail. There was no doubt in my mind that this was actually a spirit. He was shadow-like, but his clothing was colored. He would always wave at me, and sure enough, he was waving in my direction with a smile on his face. It was plain to see that he was trying to get my attention. He just wanted to see me. I was too afraid to move a muscle, and feared that in spite of everything else, that he would approach me. I had never seen anything like this before in my entire life. I didn't want to tell this to anyone though. I thought that nobody would believe me, or even listen. About a week later, I was in the kitchen with my mom, and she told me that the guest room was where our grandpa had stayed before he died, because he was too ill. That explains the reason why that very room felt like the most eerie room in the house. I almost fainted whenever I discovered that, but I knew that a spirit can travel anywhere in the home, even outside or in back of the house. But it wasn't until a month later that I decided to come out with the news. I first confided in my mom and brother, and my mother believed me, because she said that before I brought up anything that I had said. Our grandmother had experienced the exact same thing, that he was at the foot of the bed watching over her and smiling. I had a phone conversation with her, and I let her do all the talking fast, and everything that she told me measured up with my experience. And it only happened to my grandmother and I, whom he was the closest with, before he passed away. Everyone was wondering why I didn't scream or attempt to run out of the guest room as soon as I saw him, but I was too afraid. Whenever you're that close to something like that, it just takes your breath away completely. I was in my own little calm. I felt very uncomfortable. It wasn't until I started sleeping in the living room sofa that I felt appeased. Albeit, this has not been my first experience. Ever since I was the age of 5, my family and I started traveling around a lot, and we would move here and there. I've went to 9 different schools total. I'm 17 now. In previous homes, I've experienced a whole lot. I lived in a haunted house for a total of 3 years. Not only by all the experiences that I've endured, I've been doing many researches involving the paranormal. I'm really good at picking up on things too, which I've found out. There was this one house that we went into that we were thinking about purchasing, but I felt like something was wrong. There were many rooms in the home that I could just not stop venturing off into. The main ones were the master bedroom and the study. After I left the house, I told my parents that someone from the house must have passed away, someone that used to stay in the master bedroom. So, my mom went to go look up the history of the house, and sure enough, the owner and his wife, on a trip to California, got killed in a car wreck, and they lived in the master bedroom, and the owner spent most of his time in the study. After I was enlightened with that information, I was in disbelief. I still am, even to this day. My mom told me that it goes back to her being Jewish and Indian. She said that she can pick up on and see things too. She claims that it's an Indian thing, but I don't know. Maybe it is. Anyways, God bless everyone, and thank you for your time. Great website, by the way. I'm a current visitor. Hello. I have a lot of experiences to share. I've been told that I'm more in tune with the spiritual world, and that's why a lot of stuff happens to me. Anyways, I'll just share some that I can remember. One night, my friend Amanda was having a sleepover with 3 other girls, and someone brought along a Ouija to play. We were playing and having fun because it was spooky. After that, we went to sleep at about 12, and we slept on a trundle that came out of the couch. We were the only ones in the house because her mom was out. Anyways, I woke up and shook everyone awake because I had a bad feeling, and I heard the closet door slamming all night. It was pitch black, so I told for my friend to turn on the light. She did, but it blew out. She tried it again, but it blew out once more. I thought bulbs can only blow out once. We were really scared, and we saw this black mass approaching us and closing in on us. We jumped up and all ran out of the house. We were really spooked and didn't go back inside for like 2 hours. One time, when I was about 7, I'd been staying at my grandparents' house for Easter vacation. I'd got up to sleep in this one room, but for some reason, I didn't like it. Well, one night, I woke up because I felt someone watching me. There's a door that leads to my room, and right next to it is a door that leads to the backyard. I sat up in bed, and right in front of the back door was this figure. It was about 6 foot, and they appeared to have armor on. I was afraid because I knew it was bad, but I wasn't able to run away because the door to get out of the room was right next to where the spirit was. I just looked at it, and it wouldn't let me go. Finally, after like 2 minutes, it faded away, and I ran out of the room and refused to sleep in there again. Another time, at my mom's house, I was home alone, and I was watching TV in the living room. I heard the bath water running, and so I ran to the bathroom to turn it off. I thought it must have been loose or something, so I tightened it. I closed the door and resumed watching TV again. It somehow turned on again, so I tightened it again. This continued on for another 4 times, and I still didn't know what it was. In my dad's house, an old lady supposedly died there. I never sleep with the light off because I like to be able to see who and what is in my room. Anyways, I always get knocks on my door, even though it's open, and one night, I felt like someone was sitting on my chest while I was sleeping. My older sister seems to get bugged more. Someone tickles her feet, pokes the bottom of her mattress while she's sleeping, and breathes behind her when she's on the computer. In the same house, in my bedroom, I hung this picture about 6 inches across and 3 inches wide of this rapper Dr. Dre on my wall. The next day, there were scratches that had torn through the picture, although it was still on the wall. This freaked me out because I was the only one visiting my dad that weekend, and he doesn't have any pets. I put tape over it just to cheaply laminate it and see if she could or would scratch it again. The morning after that, I was surprised to find it scratched again. It freaked me out, but I left the picture there. I don't think she likes rap very much, and I think she and they take and hide things. These may not sound scary, but when they happen to you, it is. I have many more, but I can't remember anyone right now. Thanks for listening, and I'm sorry it was so long. Hey guys, it's Phantom here, and I just wanted to say that I recently discovered that the weather outside is frightful, and we'll not be able to do anything today besides slur our words, and the fire is so delightful. I think since we have no place to go, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. It's not actually snowing right now. Anyway, guys, I have no idea. That was just my closeout, Christmassy, greeting to you guys if you enjoy that. But really, thank you guys so much for tuning into this compilation of sorts, covering the best stories of the past month. The greatest gift that you can give me is to share this video around to everybody in the world who enjoys Christmas. And even if you don't enjoy Christmas, and you like every other holiday but Christmas, share it anyway. Guys, again, of course, I don't know what I'm saying. But seriously, guys, go ahead and share, like, comment, And let me know how you're doing, what you have for your plans for the holidays. It's been a great year, but I'm ready to close it out and get ready for 2019. So guys, with that, I'm just going to leave my butt away from this place. That still doesn't make any sense. But guys, seriously, I'm going to go right now. So hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Love you. Bye-bye, as always.